Stan Gibilisco here, proprietor and operator of amateur radio station W1 GV, Whiskey 1 Good Vibrations. Back in the late 1960s, when I was WA0OKV, Whiskey Alpha Zero Oscar Kilo Victor, living in my parents' house as a teenager in Rochester, Minnesota, we used to go up, our whole family, the Gibilisco family, to a lake cabin that we owned on 4 acres at the west end of Lake Courte Oreilles. I'm not even going to try to spell it for you, but when you look at it, it looks like Courte Oreilles. That name, it's the lake itself is about 6 miles long, and we were at the west end of it. And we had a cabin, or a pretty nice cottage with an outhouse. Well, it had an outhouse, and it also had an external guest cabin. You didn't have a toilet in there, you just had to have a porta potty, but you could have a ham radio, and I brought my ham radio up to that place. One summer, we were there for a couple of weeks, and I threw a wire over a couple of trees by attaching it to a baseball with electrical tape and hurling the baseball as hard as I could, making sure there was plenty of slack so that it didn't spring back and hit me in the head. Got the wire over a couple of trees and worked some great DX on 20 meters with a National 200 transceiver. I don't know if very many of you remember that transceiver, because there weren't very many of them made, I don't think, and it's been almost half a century since it was commonplace. It was designed for a single sideband, but of course I used it on CW. In the summertime up in northern Wisconsin, where our cabin was, called the North Woods, the sun doesn't set until 9 p.m. And in fact, twilight lingers sometimes until 10:30 on a clear night. But I remember working a lot of DX in Europe, and I also remember a comment from my video about the vertical antenna, suggesting that my parents must have been awfully cool to let me string all those wires around their house and around their cabin and all over the place. And yes, they were cool. My mother has passed on. My dad, in February, will be 96 years old. Probably maybe very well by the time you hear this, he'll be 96 years old, still alive, and still pretty sharp. Still pretty sharp. If he were to hear this story, he'd remember it well, because he used to enjoy my radio exploits. In fact, down in the radio shack, which we called the lab, the fallout shelter in our house in Rochester, Minnesota, I can recall giving lectures on antenna theory to my dad, who was head of the dental section at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Pretty distinguished fellow there. But I, at age 15, 16, 17, would give him lectures about antenna theory and ham radio, Ohm's law, reactance, resistance. And we had a blackboard there. It was like 3 feet high by 4 feet wide. And I used to stand at that blackboard, and he'd sit in a folding chair and attentively listen to my half-hour lectures on all kinds of technical things. Astronomy, too, I believe. At that time, I wanted to be an astronomer. When I grew up, which I never did, I just stayed a ham radio techie my whole life, ended up being a writer, as you may know if you visited Amazon.com, or you may own some of my books. But in any case, I just remember that particular vacation. Like La Courte Oreilles, it was French for the Ojibwe Indians' characteristic of having short ears. Courte Oreilles, I guess, means short ears in French. And these Ojibwe Indians who populated that area, so I guess they had short ears. Or there are a lot of stories about that, but it was there were two birds up there, two state birds in Wisconsin. The nocturnal bird and the daytime bird. The nocturnal bird, also known as the mosquito, would drink your blood. And the daytime bird, also known as the horsefly, would buzz your ears. You had to wear earmuffs to keep from being driven crazy by them. But the earmuffs, ham radio headphones would do the job. They also did the job of making a lot of really cool DX contacts that one summer vacation. And as I said, my dad would remember it well. Remember how I threw those baseballs over those trees. Remember how I came back to the cabin. For some reason, the radio didn't bother them on the television set, which had an antenna. It wasn't cable. And I guess they either just shut the TV off when I was operating, or maybe I operated when they weren't watching TV. But it was just a fun time. And I just thought I'd relate it to you. Maybe you can remember similar experiences from your ham radio lifetime. And if you haven't had any such experiences, I suggest you do it. Go out somewhere in the wilderness. If you don't have running electricity or even running water, bring along a battery-powered radio and a baseball, some electrical tape, and some unzipped zip cord, and some string to get that ball over the trees. And you know the rest of the story. You know the drill. You're ham radio operators. You know how to do this stuff. If you haven't done it yet, go do it. And don't let the state birds bite you or buzz your ears. Stan Gibelisco saying 73. Proprietor and operator now of W1GV, Whiskey 1, Good Vibrations. So long, which translates into da-da-da-da-da-da.